I'm going to commit candor here. This panel has some title, but I want you to know why it was put together. It was put together because these people have done astonishing things. They have rendered public service as private citizens, what we want to do. Even though the Surgeon General is now in government, he wasn't always. And I met his remarkable father, by the way, right before he came up here, and I got a little free medical advice, which is a hoot, so thank you very much. But I want all of you to look at and listen to them and imagine how the trajectory of their lives might be reflected in yours. You're different, you're interested in different things, you're going to do different things, but I want you to be able to imagine the staggering impact people can have beginning right where you are now. And you don't have to wait till you look like me to do this sort of thing. You know that or you wouldn't be here. But I think stories make all the difference. And so I will begin with the person on the panel I know best, America Ferraro. As the daughter of Honduran immigrants, you've been a great advocate for immigration reform, but also for a whole range of other issues. And I have seen you in action. What made you think that in addition to being a first-generation American, that you should do this? And tell them how young you were when you started.
Well, good evening, President Clinton. How many times do you get to say that in your life? Thank you for having me. I am honored to be on this stage with these amazing colleagues in this work. For quick background information, I'm first-generation Honduran American. My parents came to the United States. Me and my 5 siblings are first generation, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My mother raised us as a single mother, and you can imagine what challenges and struggles might come with that circumstance. I'm primarily an actor, producer in television and film, but it's hard to say when I began, being a part of my community. No, I haven't always been involved in political organizations and the organizations I'm involved in now, but I think your background and your life experience has everything to do with where you have the potential to make an impact. As we heard from these amazing young people, oftentimes it takes being inside of the challenges to really know what the real obstacles are and what the real solutions can be. I remember being 10 years old in 1994 in California when there was a proposition, Prop 187, up for being passed in California. And I remember being taken aside by my mother, who told me that if anybody asked me questions that made me uncomfortable, if anybody asked me to tell them things about my family that I didn't feel like talking about or that I didn't even know, that I had the right not to, and that I didn't have to take being interrogated. And I didn't even know what she was talking about. All I remember was the fear and the feeling of being, for the first time, other than everybody else I sat in class with. And those experiences change you. They shape you. They give you an experience of life that is maybe challenging, but also an experience of life that gives you the potential to speak up for a specific community, for a specific experience. And so when I say, I don't know how to say, when did I start? I feel like I didn't start. I didn't choose. I just was in my circumstance and saw that the only way to feel empowered in a circumstance that easily could have felt disempowering was to use my voice to speak up for other people in the same circumstance.
Thank you. Doctor, as Surgeon General, you're now every American's doctor, but I think the students here would be interested to know that when you were a freshman at Harvard, you founded a nonprofit focused on dealing with HIV and AIDS in both the United States and in India, your homeland. And I met your father earlier, so I know he came here and you grew up here. But was there something in your upbringing that made you believe both that you should start an NGO as a college freshman and that you could and make it work? And do you think it's something in the culture of India, which has more than 1 million registered NGOs, only domestic, and then there are about that many non-domestic ones active in India, largely because of the Indian diaspora? So tell them like how your background, your connection got you to do this. Do you think it was all personal or was it partly cultural?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. This is one of the formative parts of my story, which I enjoy sharing for one particular reason, because it has a lot to do with my family. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you. Thank you, President Clinton, for inviting me. An honor to be here with all of these esteemed panelists. My journey began very early, and it began early because of my family. My parents left India in the 1970s, and they left for the same reason that so many immigrants do. They were searching for better opportunities and education for their children, for my sister and I. But while they left and worked hard to make a life here and to support a family, they did bring certain values and lessons from India with them. And one of those lessons was one that my grandfather, who was a poor farmer in a village in India, would often tell my father. And that was about the value and the importance of being a good citizen. And I didn't understand for a long time what that meant. But what he would always say to us is he would say, whatever you become, whether it's a doctor or an engineer, those are really the two primary options if you're Indian, or anything else. But he said, whatever you become, he said, what's most important to me is that my kids and my grandkids are good citizens. And what my parents taught me what that meant. And to them, it meant that when you see a problem around you, when you see something that's broken in your community, that you step up, that you say something, and you take action to fix it. Very importantly, there was no qualifier there. There was no qualifier that said you had to be a certain age, you had to have a certain degree, you had to have a certain degree of training or experience. You just see a problem, you do what you can to help solve that. So when I was 17 and my sister was 18, we realized that HIV was a growing problem in India. And we had zero experience in addressing HIV. We had zero experience in building a nonprofit organization. We were just starting school, and that probably would have been the sober thing to do, was just focus on school. But we remembered what our parents taught us, and we thought, well, this is a moment where we should do something about it. So we started this organization together, which we ran for about 8 years, and it became the first of a series of organizations and companies that I worked on. But it all traces back to that original lesson about citizenship that my parents gave me, because there were a lot of failures along the way, and I want to be very open about that. We didn't know what we were doing all the time, and so sometimes, when we're trying to run the organization, we would make missteps in managing our team. Sometimes we would make mistakes when it came to thinking about how to market our ideas or raise funds. We failed, but then we learned from those failures, and what enabled us to keep going were the people that we ended up working with. People often say that you come to the table for a cause, but you stay for the people, you stay for the community, and that was very true with us as well. So I remember that lesson to this day from my parents about citizenship and what good citizenship is, Because I will tell you that every venture that I have worked on since then, I have not necessarily had the training or the experience to necessarily do that. But I've moved forward with it because I remembered this key lesson from my parents. And ultimately what they taught me is that the two most important ingredients you need to succeed, the two most important things you need to overcome any barrier that's in front of you are passion and perseverance. Those two things. Notably, not necessarily degrees, experience, anything. Passion and perseverance can overcome anything. And while my path may be very different from many of yours, while your paths may be different from each other, this is one thing I believe all of us have in common, which is that the source of our power is actually our ability to be passionate, to persevere. And those two things will enable us to do great things and change the world.
So Paul is our youngest participant. And arguably the most unlikely person here, because it was unlikely that he would somehow wind up at Yale, and unlikely that having done so, that he would have cared enough to get into NGO work, since he was simply lucky to survive. So he was from South Sudan. He wound up in a refugee camp in northern Kenya. His parents went home, and they subsequently perished. And yet somehow, through a whole series of miracles, here he is. So I'd like him to tell you his story and explain why he decided it wasn't enough for his life to have just survived and personally triumphed. And at a time when he could be forgiven, particularly at what is normally a reasonably self-absorbed age, for not doing what the Surgeon General did at the same age, he made the same sort of decision. So tell us your story and why you decided.
Thank you so much, President Clinton. And I think, as you clearly said, I'm the most unlikely person to be even seated here, or even to have an opportunity to sit in the audience. I was born in South Sudan. Before then, it was still part of the Sudan. And so my family and I left our village in early, I think, 1996, when I was barely 5 years old. And I think for a lot of you who are familiar with the history of Sudan, you would understand why we had to leave our village in South Sudan, and we ended up in the refugee camp in northern Kenya. The main reason, looking back, why I think we mainly left our village was because I grew up, I was a very sick kid. I contracted tuberculosis when I was about 4, and given just the nature of the state of affairs in our country, there was barely any infrastructure, healthcare, to say the least. And so I could have died. And so my mom, I don't know why she chose that. There is a better option across the border from Kenya. And so she convinced my dad that we should try and see if we can go to the refugee camp across the border and see if I could get some health care. And so they did, and I ended up in the camp when I was barely 6 years old. And so I underwent treatment for about 8 months, and then I got, miraculously I got cured. And then, so the weird part is, after I got cured, my dad never really liked being in the camp. And looking back, when I grew a little older, it was the worst place you could ever be as an adult. It was difficult. It reduces everybody to be a kid when you left home, a family or a career. And so he decided that was not it for him, and convinced my mom too that we should go back to our village and continue with our lives. And so when they made the decision, they didn't tell me. So it was just one day I got back from playing, and then I asked around where his mom and dad, and they said, oh, they would be back. So the lady that we lived close by was just trying to make sure. I don't know what exactly the game plan was, but so they didn't explain to me why they decided. So it went on for a few weeks, and then it just eventually dawned on me they had left and didn't tell me anything. And so I ended up there in the camp on my own, and apparently they had given another, my dad's distant cousin, the authority to take care of me. And so that's how I started life in the camp. And if I had more time, I could explain to you all the details of what happened. But I think while growing up in the camp, it was very difficult. But I think the only thing that I really was grateful that was that I was in the camp when I was a very young kid. And like any other kid, all I really cared about was play, eat, and then play around with my friends. And we had that in plenty. But we also had school, some semblance of school, I would say. And so the boys that I grew up with, for some reason, I never really understood why. They cared school. And so every day they would push me, wake me up, and go to school. And so that's how I started going to school in the camp. But the schools in the camp, like anybody, I don't know if anybody has ever lived in the camp. They're just few makeshift school that you barely sit about 300 kids under a tree or something like that and just scribble on the ground for a few hours, and then you go back to where you live. And so that went on for a few years of my schooling, but eventually it got better. And I think the idea was that when the camp was starting, people thought it would be there for a few years, and so that informed the kind of infrastructure that they put in place. And so for that reason, we just didn't have any school. But I'm lucky that I made something out of it, and I eventually got out of the camp. And I ended up in arguably one of the best high school in Kenya, called Alliance High School. If there are any Kenyans in the building, they would tell you what it is and what the Alliance means to any 14 or 15-year-old kid to go to. And so it gave me an opportunity. I had a free ride, and it gave me an opportunity to go to school for 3 years. And then I eventually ended up in South Africa for another 2 years at an institution called African Leadership Academy. So I spent 2 years there. And then eventually matriculated at Yale. But as to why, sort of what informed what I'm doing, while growing up in the camp, as I said, it was a really weird place, to say the least, to grow up in. But for one thing, when I was there, I decided that I tried out a few things to do with business. So my first business was, it was an orange concentrate, and so I would dilute it and then sell to a bunch of people the camp was really dry, and so everybody was always thirsty. And so I figured out that was an opportunity to make some money. And so I spent almost every day after school doing that. And then eventually I figured out there was another opportunity, and I would buy excess food from the refugees and then sell it to the local people that lived around the camp. So that was sort of what informed my interest in business. And looking back, when I was doing that, I also grew a little bit, and I would hire a few of my friends to work with me. And I just realized that if one of the best ways to change our communities was just have or start an organization that provide people opportunities. And so that was, in my view, the best thing that happened to me. And that's exactly what I want to do. And for that, about 2 years ago, my friend and I who just graduated from Yale thought, we starting an agribusiness, and it's just for the same reason that if you start an organization that provide economic opportunity, and I think that's the best way, in my view, of making a difference in your own community. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. And I think it was a very convoluted way of telling me my story, but I apologize.
No, we got it.
Thank
But
you.
what you need to know that you're too modest to say is that when someone goes through everything you've been through, and then they get to where you are, they really have two paradigm choices. They can say, God, I made it. I ran the gauntlet. Here I am, and I'm going to get everything I can out of this. And if I did it, everybody else can. Or they say, yeah, I made it and I worked hard, but boy, I was fortunate, and what I would like to do is to make it possible for more people just like me to have the life that I have. You made the second choice, and you made it as a young person, and you deserve a lot of credit for it. It's interesting to us.
Thank you.
Now, Tawaka, I saved you for last, not just because you were the first Yemeni and the first Arab woman ever to win a Nobel Peace Prize, and at the time, the second youngest person to do it. But because one thing people talk about, she did it for her work, nonviolent work to promote peace and human rights and the participation of women and girls in Yemeni life. Now, one of the things that people talk about all over the world, in every culture, at all income levels, is how we can ensure the full participation of women and girls and opportunities. And how can you be a mother and be a successful business person? You have 3 children, right? Yes. This woman won the Nobel Prize risking her personal safety, and she had 3 children, and she did it anyway. So I want you to talk about that a little bit, because that's something that speaks to people in every culture, in every circumstance. Why did you decide to do it? You knew you were putting yourself at risk. How do you think you minimize that risk? And how did you raise your children while you were doing all this? Who helped you? What happened? How'd you deal with it?
Thank you, President Clinton, and good night for everyone here. I am so happy to be here really with the students, because I really like working with the students. And I believe that students is our key to change the world. So thank you for all the students around the world. And also thank you to the students in Yemen who are continue their struggle against dictatorship, against corruption, and also against militia, Houthi militia who occupied the capital, Sana'a. If you ask me about my story, I will tell you it isn't personal story. It's the story of the dream of Yemeni people, of Arab countries people, who dream for freedom and dignity and equal citizenship and peace and democracy. Yes, this is my story. And it's the story of every woman in the region, of every youth in the region, of everybody there. So how did I, as Tawakkul, did what I did? It's because the people who decided to break the chains. So we broke the chains. Really, we broke the chains. In the beginning, I was alone. And I said, okay, what is all this crisis around me in every field, in economic, in political, in security, in everything. So will I watch all this crisis and just sit in my chair and cry? No, I decided to be the solution. Yes. Then I decide, how can I be the solution while everything around me is denying me to do something as a woman and also as a citizen? Because people in my country, under the ruling of the ousted president, was all of them, they were out of the equal citizenship. So they are denying to have their rights as a citizen. Then we have, denying to have our rights as a woman. So we as women have two, injustice way, from the dictator, and also from the society. So because of that, I decided to establish an organization called Women Journalists Without Chains. So through Women Journalists Without Chains, we, as a team of Women Journalists Without Chains, broke all the chains around us, all the chains. First, speaking about people, speaking for people, leading people in the street. In my country, we have more than 70 billion weapons, piece of weapons, that people, use it when they, want to have anything, or when they want to solve their problems. But we, as women, but I can't say I, so it's we. So we, as women, go to the street, rise a new slogan that we should, as Yemeni people, use non-violent way to solve all our problems. And we established a square, and it was the first square in the country. That it was in front of the cabinet. We called that was on 2006. It's before the Arab Spring. So we called this square Freedom Square, and we act our rights through sit-ins and demonstrations. We were very small number of people there, and they thought it was something very strange. Women with some number of men. Oh my God, women go to the street carrying a microphone, saying to the people, wake up, wake up, wake up. Yes, we did that. I was in every street in Sana'a telling Yemeni people, wake up, wake up, wake up, Yemeni people. And Yemeni people some of them, they said they are laughing at me. Some of them, they were strange, and some of them decided to follow me. And through these people who decided to follow me, we established our peaceful revolution that started on 2011 after Tunisia revolution. So how it's our decision that we must be in the front line, and we must break the chains, and also we shouldn't ask any rights from anyone. We should act our rights. That is exactly what we should act our rights. I always believe that we will not take our rights without two things. Through the expression rights, it's right to talk and right to walk. So through right to talk and through right to walk, we step down the dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh. So we didn't ask the government to give us license for making demonstrations, or license for giving or making our newspapers, or even, by the way, Women Journalists Without Chains published the first SMS mobile, news mobile. And it was, there is no, in the region, in the country has this mobile except the army. So without any permission, we did, we make, we published the SMS News, and it reached to more than 100,000 of Yemeni people inside that. And because of that, after 1 year, Ali Saleh regime block it or close it. So yes, we did a great work because we broke our fear, because we broke the chains in front of us, and also because we believe that we as women and we as youth can change our country and can change the world. So I am so proud. Now what did I do with my children? So I see all the youth in my country as my children. Really, by the way, not just the youth, even the old man, they called me Mama Tawakkul. So really, what I want for my kids, I want it for my kids of my society. So I want a better life for my kids. I want them to have a good education, to have a good health, to be powerful people, to be very smart, to be happy, to travel everywhere. But also I have to think about the people in my country. So because of that, I sacrifice on my life. It's for my kids and it's for Yemeni people. So this is my role, and I will continue my role on that. Yeah.
I'm going to work backward. Doctor. So when you were 18, you started an NGO, you said with your sister, on AIDS awareness and care. You know a lot about the global health landscape now and the landscape in America. If 10 of these young people came up to you and said, we want to do what you did, what area of healthcare would you recommend, and what area of the world would you recommend we do? They said, we want you to design an NGO for us to run. What would you choose?
That is a fantastic question. There are some very interesting trends that are taking place right now in healthcare, both domestically but also internationally. And there are two trends I want to tell you about because you've, probably heard about them, but there are areas where we desperately need help, especially from younger people who can bring in innovative thinking and energy. When we think about international health, what we are seeing are, one, that many countries are dealing with chronic diseases like diabetes, like obesity, like hypertension and cardiovascular disease, like cancer as well. And this is a shift from what we saw maybe 30, 40 years ago, when the primary concern in many developing countries was infectious diseases. And as part of this trend, what we're seeing is that we, the United States, now have a lot more in common with developing countries because we are fighting some shared battles, and that's battles with chronic disease. But we are also dealing with shared vulnerabilities, and nothing pointed that out so clearly as the recent Ebola epidemic that we saw in West Africa. One of the things I am most honored to be able to do as Surgeon General is to work with the 6,700 officers we have in the Public Health Service Commission Corps. And it was these officers who traveled from all parts of the United States to Liberia in West Africa to treat patients who had Ebola. But they did so not only because they have a deep humanitarian spirit and wanted to be of service to the world, but they did so because they knew that in 2014 and 15, that we live in an interdependent world, and that the only way to keep America safe from Ebola was to attack it where the source of the epidemic was, in West Africa. So when we think about international health and these growing shared challenges, but also shared vulnerabilities, that creates an even greater urgency to have the kind of international cooperation around the most urgent of issues, like some of the ones that I named today. That means that countries need to be able to share lessons with each other. They need to be able to work with each other. And in doing so, not only can they improve health, but they can strengthen relationships between each other. That area of health diplomacy, this is an area where I believe the ingenuity of young leaders can be absolutely instrumental in helping to build these bridges between countries and share these lessons. But there's one other trend I want to tell you about, and that's a shift that we started to see more and more that has led us to realize that to create better health is not the same as creating good health care. I'll tell you that a few years ago, I was taking care of a young woman in the hospital who came to the hospital because of an infection in her foot. Now, she was a young woman but had developed diabetes very early in life, and she had struggled with obesity early in life. And as a result of her diabetes, as some of you know, people with diabetes have a greater risk of developing infections. And so a few years after she developed diabetes, she came in with her first skin infection on her foot. And she received oral antibiotics for it, and it took care of it. But then the infections kept coming back. And eventually she had to come into the hospital and receive intravenous antibiotics. And those worked until they didn't, until she started coming back with resistant infections and required stronger and stronger antibiotics. And finally, the time that I saw her in the hospital, she had actually developed a bacterial infection from a strain that was so resistant that she had actually spread to her bloodstream. She developed sepsis and she nearly died. And after a number of harrowing days in the ICU, she finally turned the corner and came to my service on the internal medicine team. And each day that I saw her, I would look at her legs and I would see the consequences of chronic infections. I would see these scars that she had had. But they were also scars that I could not see, scars that she bore from a lifetime of dealing with obesity, of dealing with chronic illness, being unable to get out there and do the things she wanted to do, and the subsequent depression that ensued. And these prevented her from really living a full life. And when I think, how could we have helped her more? Could we have helped her by prescribing better medications, by having a better hospital? Maybe. But I think that the source of her problem was actually much farther upstream. And as I talked to her, I realized that while we could tell her about what foods to eat and the importance of physical activity, she lived in a neighborhood where going outside for a walk after dinner put your life at risk because it wasn't safe. She lived in a neighborhood where the closest place to shop for groceries was 7-Eleven, and there weren't any fresh fruits and vegetables readily available to her. She had challenges that went way beyond the healthcare system, but which we need to fix if we want to create better health. That recognition that we have to address the upstream factors that impact health, from how we plan our cities, to how we think about our schools, to how we set up our workplaces, to how we make fruits and vegetables and activity available to everyone. This is the fundamental question that stands before us, because we can't focus solely on the healthcare system anymore and think that we're going to create better health. We have to move further upstream. The problem and the challenge we face now is we don't fully understand how to shift many of these upstream factors, these social determinants of health, in ways that will fundamentally change the ultimate outcome to create better health. And that's where we need you. That's where we need people who are willing to try new models, who are willing to try new ideas and study them and see what works, what doesn't work, but also who are willing to build bridges between communities and share these lessons. You know, for the last 4 weeks, I've been on the road visiting about 22, 23 cities around the country, meeting with community members, with leaders to understand firsthand, as I start this tenure as Surgeon General, what their health concerns are. And what they tell me everywhere are, extraordinary stories of heroism. I hear from people who are doing their best in extraordinarily tough circumstances to take care of people in their community. They don't have any resources themselves, but they're scrapping together what they can to build programs that'll help 1, 2, 10, 20, 40 people. But everywhere I go, they ask me the same question. They say, we know that obesity and diabetes are problems all over this country. So what can we in Birmingham learn from Orlando? What can we learn from what they're doing in Akron, Ohio? What can we learn from what they're doing in Sacramento, California? And they don't have ways to connect to this. And we see this internationally as well. So this is where we need your ingenuity. This is not just about technology, although technology helps, but it's about creating a new culture around health. And that's what we need to do, is we need to build a new culture around health, where everything supports health, from how our streets are built, to how our businesses operate, to what we teach in our schools, to what we guide our families to do.
Thank you. America, I want to ask you a version of the same question, and then we'll go to Twitter and take questions that all of you can answer. Because I've known you for several years now, I know how much you care about immigrant rights and immigration reform. I know you've worked with Save the Children in Mali, and you've worked against human trafficking in India. So if you could enlist them, all these people, in the area, not necessarily the one you care the most about, but based on your observation and your rather amazing range of activities, given the fact that you've been established and you're both a new family and a new career, what would you say, where do you think they're most needed of the things you care about?
I would agree that my list of interests seems quite indecisive and erratic, and sometimes makes me feel scared that I'm not making enough of an impact in one place because I care about all these different interests. And what I've come to understand, which I think is very much what Dr. Murthy was saying, is that we have to learn to stop siloing issues as if they're not connected to all the other issues. As if protests in Yemen aren't connected to what's happening in America today. As if immigration isn't the same thing as what's happening in Ferguson. You know, as if war in South Sudan doesn't affect us. We have a shared destiny. We have a shared future. And that is what I would want everyone in this room to leave with. Don't go out and tackle these issues because it's the right thing to do. If that doesn't compel you, what should compel you is that all of these issues will in some way affect your future. It's the smart thing to do. And what I would say that I learned through my travels is that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And so it's on us. And every person in this room already has so much more opportunity. If you're sitting in this room today, you are on top. And you're already a leader, and you have the potential to be a leader in your community. And so it's on you to take the opportunities that you've been given, that you have, to go and empower your peers, your families, your communities. Because if they don't engage, that will determine the future you live in. And so I would say engage those who don't have the opportunities you have. Meet them where they're at. Understand why they didn't make it to university, why they couldn't keep a job, why they got pregnant at 15. Ask the questions. Learn about the real obstacles that stop people from getting to where you're sitting right now. Be grateful for the opportunities you've had, and then go and work with those who don't have your opportunities to create the future you want to live in.
Thank you. Now, we have two quite interesting Twitter questions. One for Paul from the Middle East, from Nader Abara. Paul, having friends in Syria who've fallen into similar circumstances, can you tell us what your key was to survival in the camps? And what would you share with refugees as motivation to persevere and emerge? And we all know in Jordan alone, which is a small country, already majority Palestinian, not Jordanian, with a fair number of refugees from Egypt, from the trouble there, there are somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000 Syrian refugees, many of them children. So this is a very important thing. How are we going to turn them into you? What's your advice?
That's certainly a very great question. And I think one thing I remember from what really made a huge difference in my life was the opportunity to have people who really cared and people who not only sort of just knowing that, hey, we are in this really tough place and extremely tough circumstances, but that if we remain positive and if we remain committed to trying to make something out of this dire situation, that down the line we could change our circumstances. And the exact story in my life that happened was that when my parents left me in the camp, I ended up growing up with about 12 boys who are older than me. They're in maybe early teens and just mid-teens. And I don't know for a lot of you who are familiar with the story of Sudan, there's the Lost Boys of Sudan. Also, I grew up with a section of them who every single day they made sure that I go to school, and that part of my own social contract with living with them was that I behave well and that I should go to school. And so that was the only thing they wanted me to do. They cooked for me and they made everything easier. So I thought this was easy deal for me, that all I have to do is just wake up and go to school. And as to people who are kids who are in similar situation in Syria, I'm not sure exactly how sort of the living conditions are, but one thing I know is that at least the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees certainly sometime would provide an opportunity for kids to go to school. And I would say to a kid who is in a refugee camp in Jordan is that just go to school. And I know it's very difficult. Sometimes you'd wake up, there's not enough food to eat, and going to school in an empty stomach is really, really difficult. And also doing school when you don't really know what it means or what it means. And one thing I remember from President Clinton was that his story of the governor of the state give them an opportunity to come and visit the governor's office and seeing what it means actually to go to school, what the opportunity of that. And so refugees camp sometimes can be extremely tough places. But for people, a lot of you who deal with refugees, if you can have an opportunity to give a kid in a camp to see what exactly would it take, or why does it matter that they're doing or they're being told to go to school. And I know those are really difficult things to do, but I think I don't really have an exact sort of answer to tell you, but all I can say is that it's difficult, but I think one thing that has really made a huge difference in me was the opportunity to go to school. And these communities that these kids grow up in should be very encourage the kids to go to school. And I think that's what really made a difference for me, that we had the Sudanese community in the camp, people who made sure that kids, the only thing they had to do was just to go to school. There was nothing else that you have to do. And I think that's one thing I would say for kids who grew up in the camps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I can't believe you remember I said this, but what he was referring to is that when I was a young boy growing up, the governor of my state left strict orders that whenever he was out of his office, if a class of school children came in, they should all, boys and girls alike, be permitted to come into his office and sit in his chair, because he believed that as young children, it would make a lasting impression that might change their sense of what was possible for them. And you just made a point, and I thought what you said was quite moving, by the way, but you made a point that is relevant to everybody here, and that all of us have dealt with in our lives. At some point, if you do this work, you'll get discouraged. And you'll say, well, if we just had a perfect government, we wouldn't have to do all this. Or if I had access to Bill Gates' fortune, I wouldn't have this problem. And one of the most important lessons you have to learn, even when you're my age, but especially when you're your age, is that just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you don't have to do what you can do. That's what you have to do. You have to do what you can do. And one of the things that I really hope everybody leaves here with is that sense the empowerment comes in doing what you can, not in being discouraged because you can't do everything. Now, a questioner named Cindy asked a question that I think belongs to Tawakal. Maybe if you're too embarrassed to answer it, you don't have to. But this is the sort of thing you get asked in America. The question is, what sacrifices have you had to make to pursue your passion and to continue doing the work you are now doing? You told us what you got out of it, and you were too modest I'm not asking you to complain, but tell us what you gave up, even if it's no more than an occasional anxiety if you think somebody's going to beat you up.
I believe that we can change our society to be better, and also, the world, because we want the world to be justice also, as we are working and struggling in our country to be also justice. So we believe that nonviolence is our way, is the only way that we will take. And also this nonviolence will be with sacrifices. So we are ready to pay any kind of sacrifices for achieving the dream of justice and equality and democracy and peace and good governance. So there is many kind of sacrifices that we paid for this. A lot of people died in the street. A lot of people in prison. A lot of people been kidnapped, been hidden. Sorry for my English, by the way. For me, I entered to the prison many times. The last time they put me in the prison, it was in 22nd of January on 2011. They kidnapped me from the street. They put me in the women prison. I was very, very angry because they can't just call me because the police station is just 2 meters from my home. I will go to them. Why do they kidnap me from the street? So I will go. So I was very angry about their way, but also I was very happy. Because as I told you, before February 11, which is the date of peaceful revolution, before that I was with thousands of people in the street, and that was very small number when you compare after the February 11, which is the date of great peaceful revolution in Yemen. So I was very happy when they put me in the prison, because at that time I said, yes, this is the sacrifices that will make my voice to enter to every house in Yemen country. So, and that is exactly what happened. They put me in the prison, and after that, all the governorate most of the people in the government go to the street and raise the slogan of free tawakkul in one hand, and from another hand, peaceful, peaceful. Our revolution is peaceful. So so yes, I sacrificed. I entered to the prison. They tried many times to kill me. They threatened my children, but I didn't give up, and I will not give up. I will not give up. Because this is the way of freedom. This is the way of freedom. And we know very much how to take our freedom. And by the way, we learn from our inspired people, like Martin Luther King, how to use non-violence way and how to dream. We dream, and we know, by the way, yes, now millions of people go after February 11, million of Yemeni people. And by the way, also, they told me many times, my friends, my foreign friends, they visited me to my house and to my office and told me, Tawakkul, please stop. Are you crazy? Don't do that. Yemeni people will kill each other, and you will fail. You will be alone in the street. I told them, no, you will see how millions of people, Yemeni people, will go to the street and will call for a new Yemen. And that is exactly what happened. Millions of people go to the street, sacrificed, struggled, and when in the first step of their goals, when they could step down the dictator Ali Saleh. And that's still just the first step of our big battle. This is just the first step. Now we are suffering from counter-revolution. We are suffering from coup, the counter-revolution, which is the militia of Houthi that's supported by Iran, that they now occupied our capital. But will we be afraid? Will we give up? No. The students that make the most important point when they go to the street. By the way, our revolution, most of the people there was students, their ages was less than 25 years. So now the same students, the same women, they are now continue their struggle against militia, and you will see how Yemen will be it very soon, and we will not give up, as I said, and we will reach to the great and strong Yemen.
Thank you. Yeah.
I can't help but sit here and listen to Yawako tell her story about what's happening in her country and what they're willing to sacrifice to fight for a voice in the future of their country. In this country, we have a voice. We have the right to vote. And too many young people in this country do not exercise that right to vote. And as you were saying, President Clinton, it's easy to sit and say, well, things aren't perfect and my vote doesn't count and what does it matter? But it's wasting what people are dying around the world to get. We have that. And we have to show up for ourselves. We have to show up for ourselves.
I want to add
I
something.
completely agree. Let me just go ahead.
I want to add something to the youth. You have to be leader. You have to have the feeling that you are the responsible on change the world. And when America said that we are so close to each other, and I don't know, I can't express what she said in English, but really, all of us has to work with each other. All of us has to know that we live in very small village, and we are really one family. So take care of the world. You are the future, yes, but tomorrow begins now. Tomorrow begins now. So we should decide how to lead the change and how to make the future. It's very important. We must be one hand to lead change and to lead the future. This future must be very peaceful. This future, this world must be for all of the people around the world. All of us has to be equal. We are President Clinton. We as people in the world looking for equal citizenship, international equal citizenship. It isn't just inside our countries. We want equal citizenship. We are global citizen. So let's work for this moment. I will end something very small on the role of women. When Hillary Clinton was the foreign affairs minister, the spring came to all the world. Because she was carrying the soul of youth, and she was with the will and dream of people. So please, tell her and tell all the people here in America, they have to be with people, not with the dictators. Thank you.
Thank you. We're almost out of time. I feel I owe it to the unanswered questions to say, we got one question from Emmeline Carr that said, how can young people's commitments be taken seriously in a world where your, quote, reputation precedes you? The answer is that they'll be taken seriously if you keep them. And then there's a question to the Surgeon General we don't have time to answer, but he said, it's a good question for at least those of us in America who've lived through the last 10 or 15 years. As a scientist, how do you cope with politicians who smear you in your health work for ideological reasons? You continue to tell the truth with dignity and live it, which is what he has done. I have to say this because of what you said about peacefulness, and because you were in a camp in Kenya as a result of the violence in South Sudan. And now Kenya has known its own fair share of violence because of its nearness to Somalia and al-Shabaab. Tomorrow, 50 years ago tomorrow, the great Civil Rights March in Selma, Alabama was held on what became Bloody Sunday. And they marched across something called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. On the 35th anniversary in my last year as president, I had the honor of joining with those still alive. There'll be more people there tomorrow while we're here. And while it was on a Sunday, the actual day of the anniversary is tomorrow. And you talked about nonviolence, and you recognized indirectly that you ran the risk. Martin Luther King was murdered 3 years and 1 month after the Selma March. His great inspiration, Mohandas Gandhi, liberated India from colonial rule peacefully, and then he was murdered by a fellow Hindu because he wanted India for the Muslims and the Jains and the Buddhists and the Jews and everybody. Nelson Mandela spent
They will try to murder me.
Yeah. And he spent Mandela, who my great friend who just died recently, died, it seems like yesterday to me still. He spent 27 years in jail. So there's no point in our sugarcoating this. No one can guarantee you a trip through life that doesn't have some adversity. And even if you are just successful in doing what you're going to do, some people will be mean to you and resentful. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to help other people. The most valuable thing that's been said here today is that you are part of a global society. The good news is an 8-year-old can get on the internet and learn things I had to go to university to learn. The bad news is that includes learning how to make a roadside bomb that will blow innocent people to smithereens. You live in a world where all the walls look more like nets. And the most important scientific discovery for you as a citizen of the last 20 years is not the Higgs boson or any of the other fascinating things in particle physics. The most important one is the elemental finding of the sequencing of the human genome, which is that every non-age-related difference you can see in this room, including gender and skin color and eye color and body shape, is lodged in only 0.5% of your genome. So if you are struggling away in a refugee camp in Kenya because your country, South Sudan, is torn asunder, you're still 99.5% the same as an American movie star sitting next to you. And this is a big deal. Because even if you forget about the politics, tell the truth now. Don't we all spend 99.5% of our time thinking about the 0.5% of ourselves that's different? I mean, we need to spend a lot more time thinking about that simple fact. That's the argument America made. That's the argument you made for nonviolence. That's the argument. So I will just leave you with this thought. Tomorrow, think of this. Your presence here means you are the heir of Gandhi, King, and Mandela. It means that you, whether you won a Nobel Prize or you're leaving your college campus for the first time to get here, whether you're worth millions of dollars or you're here by the good grace of someone else, you must never fail to do what you can, because you can't do everything. You can make a difference. And if you add up the collective endeavors represented by the potential in this room, it would move the world. That's what their lives show, and what we hope yours will. Thank you all.